Yo, what's good, y'all? We back with another episode. What's good, y'all? We back with another episode. Welcome back to another episode of Introspective Thoughts. As y'all can see, I look motherfucking tired because I am motherfucking tired. I just had to fight DC traffic. And again, previously recorded, this is the week before inauguration. So I'm just like, Jesus be a fence, be a rooftop, a shelter, a machete, a 38 special, because I can't. I can't. But we're gonna make the best of what we got. We're gonna make it do what it do. We back per usual, like 4 flats on a Cadillac, like the passenger seat with your nigga laying in it, all that good jazz, you know. Back in a panoramic, a Panasonic, a pancreas, a Panera bread. We back in all of that stuff, a Ponder replay, all that good stuff. Because I told y'all I refuse to say the word pandemic because I don't believe we're in that. I'm sorry. If other countries can go outside and frolic and have fun, damn it, we should be able to do so as well. But whatever, we'll talk more about that later. Actually, we're gonna talk about that today, kinda in a sense. So I have a special guest on here, one of my best friends. We literally go all the way back to the days where we had to hike the mountains to go to class in 5-degree weather, in the rain, the sleet, the snow, the hail, and deal with racist white people as they drive by at 40 miles an hour, calling people niggers with hard R's, all that great jazz, right? But now she's grown up and she's doing amazing things out in Arizona in the desert where it is ungodly hot for whatever reason. Like I don't even know if hell gets that hot, but you know, I can't speak from personal experience, but whatever. But welcome to Introspective Thoughts for the first time, but definitely not the last time. Miss Zeruiah Buchanan. Still mute. Okay, there we go.
No, I was laughing at you because I love you so much.
Y'all know they know I be with the shit. Like, you just knew to this, but they know I be with the shit. This is normal at this point.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I guess I'll give just like a rundown of who I am and what I'm doing with my life. Because, well, that's important. So, like Charles says, Zeruiah Buchanan, pronouns she, her, hers, because we don't ever want to misgender anybody. I am an epidemiologist. How I got there is an interesting story. We can definitely talk about. But epidemiologists with, I guess, specialties and, as they like to call it in this industry, expertise in health equity and mental health, more specifically suicide. And I do a lot of things on the side as well. I try to be an activist and advocate for communities that are marginalized. I don't want to say vulnerable. I'm trying to change my language. But communities that are marginalized by an oppressive system. So that's what I'm doing.
Okay, then, all righty then. Because I know a lot of folks was like, she a what now? Like, spell that. What that look like? What is a epidemic? What is that? Yeah, I know, y'all. I hang around smart people, like very, very smart people. And I'm gonna be real with y'all. When she told me that she was going into epidemiology, I said, "No, what the hell is that? What does that do? Like, where they live at? Like, what they money where they money reside? Cause where they money reside? Where they money reside? Let me stop before I get copyright infringement because he not to sue the white woman for that, and I ain't finna get caught up for that there. But anyway, shout out to him for that though, cause that's a good money ritual, you know, or money mantra, excuse me. But yeah. But yeah, when she told me she was going to be an epidemiologist, I'm like, I don't even know what that is. Like, I'm like, is that a cuss word? Like, am I allowed to say that? Like, I don't know what this is. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna go to hell if I say that word. But just know that she and everyone else that's like her is the reason why we can have conversations about racism that are just beyond the overt in your face type stuff, right? She's the person that goes and studies like how health plays into, you know, how racism plays into health or how health plays into racism. Because both of those are actually interchangeable. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. Talk about how, racism is a public health issue, because in case you weren't aware about it, yeah, you don't need nobody to tell you, especially if you are any of these kinds of shades, whether you on the light end of the spectrum or you on the dark end of the spectrum. You don't need nobody to tell you that racism definitely affects your health, because you can see it about where you live. You can see it in the mental health aspect. You can see it in your food. You can see it in the water, looking at Flint. You can see it in a realm of different things. But I definitely think this conversation that we're going to have about racism and public health, and how they intertwine and interconnect, I think this is going to be a very necessary conversation, especially with the way in which our country is moving and how we've just seen things just over the past, we'll say, decade at this point. We'll say from 2010, I'll throw 2010 up into 2021, which is wild that 10 years has gone by. Well, 11 years has gone by that quick. That's wild to me. But I feel like that this is a conversation that definitely needs to be had, because if we plan on getting past certain things, a lot of stuff has to be addressed, and this is one of those things. Shout out to God, I'm gonna kick myself in the ass because I cannot remember the person who came up with this idea, but he, along with Gloria Lansing Billings, with the idea of critical race theory. If you've never heard of critical race theory, that's about to be sprinkled all in on this. But that basic premise of critical race theory is looking at the different nuances of how race plays into different aspects of our life, whether it be gender, whether it be class, whether it be sexuality, whether it be religion, whether it be health, whether it be where you live at, whether it be voting, whether it be all of these different things, right? But I think the most important one out of that is health, because again, we're in a Panasonic. We are in a Ponder Replay. We need to have these conversations if we plan on moving forward. Which we've had a conversation with Khadijah back in the day about some of these things, because she's also in the field of public health. I believe we talked about that at some point in time. And if not, y'all know she's coming back to have a conversation about that anyway, because duh. So enough of me talking about that. Let's go ahead and jump into this conversation. So you brought up earlier that, being an epidemiologist, you look at all of these different aspects and all of these different nuanced pieces that tie into public health, especially when it comes to Black and Latinx people, and indigenous populations, because we definitely can't leave them out. What is if you can tell us, what are some things that you've kind of noticed as far as trends in regards to like race and public health, to the point where it damn near can be classified as a crisis at this point? Like, what are some things that you've noticed, or that you and some of your colleagues have noticed, to where, like I said, we're at this point where this shit is definitely a problem?
Well, I think, I guess I have to back up a little bit. So, epidemiology is the study of diseases. And so, when we frame that, we have to think about infectious disease, we have to think about maternal child health, we have to think about mental health, all these different aspects. So, there's different aspects to everything. I think one of the things that will be coming out, and as I further my education, there'll be this section for like structural racism or structural oppression epidemiology. Even though those things are very much embedded into all the work that we do, there may be a new kind of like area of expertise for that. And then I want to mention too that, you know, not all epidemiologists are looking at everything, so I don't want to group everybody. but definitely but definitely, I think that when you think about epidemiology, and I work in a space where I there's only two of us, And so there's a lot of people around us that have assumptions about epidemiology. And basically, straightforward, the best way to explain it to people who really don't understand is like, I sit at the table to ask the question, okay, and why? And so when you think about asking the question, okay, and why, you have to go beyond like there's just a disparity here. We're reporting a disparity. So when I first went into public health, I thought that racism and public health head was already a crisis because public health is foundational in social justice. So when you say that, then you have to acknowledge that racism is a crisis. And throughout any of my classes, throughout conversations with professors, we were always talking about how, you know, racism is affecting our health mentally, emotionally, and physically on all aspects. And so I guess like there are so many examples really. I guess particular to Black women, when we're talking about our maternal mortality and infant mortality rates and just our well-being in general through being Black women, being pregnant, and all of that stuff. There was a study done, and I'm sorry I can't cite it because I don't have it in front of me, but you can look it up, where they were looking at American white women, American Black women, and then Black women within Africa. And when they looked at that, African women and white women were on par with one another when we're talking about giving birth and maternal mortality and infant mortality and things of that nature. And then Black women, where there was a huge disparity. But one of the biggest things that we were like, okay, and why? When they then tried to look at African women who came over to America, within one generation, they are matching the disparity that exists among Black African American women. So it's like, okay, but what's going on uniquely in America that is causing this disparity? And it's like, discrimination, racism, stress, I don't know, poverty, all of these things that have been a culmination of, and basically the addition of all these different things that come with structural racism into poor health outcomes for our Black women, poor health outcomes for our Black kids, so on and so forth. And so that's just one example. Then we also, when we're looking at breast cancer, white women have a higher prevalence and incidence of breast cancer, but Black women have a higher mortality rate when it comes to breast cancer too. And so it's like, okay, why are you overrepresented in deaths among breast cancer when we're looking at cause-specific rates, mortality rates? And so that goes into how care is offered. It goes into the equipment that you have to administer mammograms. It goes into whether or not you have access to going in mammograms. It goes into how late someone is diagnosed with breast cancer and those different trends. And so with that, with what we're seeing with COVID, and all these various different things and so many examples that I could cite right now, that's when we see racism is affecting it. But I think one of the barriers that we are having in public health is that we're understanding that there are disparities. We're acknowledging disparities, but we're not necessarily connecting it back to structural racism and structural oppression. Because like you said, there is still like this, I guess, downplay of like racism is a public health crisis from some people. And so because there's this downplay, I inadvertently know that you're not understanding this big picture. And that's the biggest thing, understanding the big picture. I think for me, I understand it because I got one of my degrees in Africana studies. So I'm like, all of this background stuff that happened during slavery, that happened in 1619, all of that is up here with us right now. Like, we can't just say we can't talk about slavery. We can't just say we can't talk about the conditions in which our ancestors lived. going from, slavery to black codes to pig laws to Jim Crow to all this stuff, and then mass incarceration. Because all of this stuff is a culmination and a combination of things that affect our health today. So I think I answered your question, but I'm going to stop there.
No, you did. No, and because as you were speaking, I like the thought of two separate thoughts actually came up in my head. The idea of epigenetics came up, right? And how a lot of the trauma that's passed down, and not even just kind of the trauma, but like even some good things that are passed down, through genetics, from racism, to Jim Crow, to mass incarceration, to all of the things that, specifically Black people have dealt with, that idea popped into my head. And I feel like that's also something that is not taken into consideration. And then the other thought that popped into my head was I immediately thought back to when you brought up breast cancer and how women have a higher mortality rate versus the white women with the diagnosis rate. I thought about Black women when they are in labor, and Black women are dying in labor or they're dying after they've had a major surgery or something of the sort, because there's this idea that, oh, Black women don't feel pain, or that they have a higher pain tolerance or pain threshold than white women or than Asian women or than any other woman that is on the face of this planet, right? And so I feel like your question, not, excuse me, your response to that answered the question, but it's also making me think like, how is it that, and I feel like I know the answer to this question already, but it's like, how is it that we've gotten to this point where people can't put two and two together? Because it's like, even as somebody who's never studied this, but who is a historian and, who is a sociologist, who is a political science major, who is a social studies, nut in general, and a teacher, like I can see the connections between like how racism and disease, or racism and, epigenetics, or racism and this, or this and this come together. And it's like, how is it that we have gotten this far or this advanced, quote unquote, and people are not putting these numbers together? It's like, duh, like, how does this not make sense? If that makes sense, right? Go ahead.
I mean, I wouldn't say that people aren't putting two to two together. I think people aren't understanding the immensity and the influence of racism. So I don't think people understand, like, for example, redlining and how redlining has an effect on where Black people and really people of color are living, and then that has an effect on your education, and then that in turn has an effect on your like where you're able to go, your socioeconomic status, but also your understanding of health in general, and that educational piece of it. So that I don't think people really go back as far. So like if we're talking about a food desert, I was in a meeting not too long ago, and we were talking about diabetes among the indigenous population. And they were like, we really need to figure out why that's happening, or something to that nature. And then one of the doctors in the meeting was like, that's because it's a food desert. They're in a food desert. What do you mean? And then somebody was like, yeah, we need to, look into the food desert type thing. And then they were like, well, we have to figure out the history behind the food desert, because the history behind the food desert is very racially charged. And so I think we get to the point where we're like, we need to look into why there is a food desert. And that might be, because of racism, but we don't go back further enough to be like, this is our history. And this is what we did, and this is how we created this space where there is a food desert. And so it's kind of like that whole entire thing where we talk about like white guilt. It's like, are you too guilty to look back further enough to realize like this is our fault? Like, this is why this is in place. And so I think looking at the overall like structural racism and really understanding like the roots of it will help us then understand why things are the way they are, and then we can talk about the disparities. And so instead of talking about the disparities, talking about why that disparity exists, and then talking about the history, we might need to be going in a completely different way, do a 180, and talk about the history, what's happening, and then why.
Yeah, because I'm just like, just based off the example you gave, I'm like, how the fuck does that not make sense? Like, what do you mean? Like, oh, they have a history of diabetes. Well, yeah, girl, you pushed them off on reservations. But how much do we give to those Native American populations that are on reservations? And then it's like, because the same thing could be said about the Black community as far as like high blood pressure or diabetes or, you know, any other disease that takes place within our community. Is like, how is it that you can't see that it's the environment around you that is playing into that? And as you were speaking, you know, when you brought up the Native American population, I immediately thought of North Memphis, right? And I thought of the portion of North Memphis where I grew up in, and then I end up going back in and teaching in, right? Where the nearest grocery store, the nearest grocery store, my God, is in Midtown, if I'm not mistaken, which by car, that's a 20-minute drive, easily. You know, the nearest Walmart is across the bridge in Arkansas. You know, that's a 25-minute drive. And if you are in that area, the only thing that's around you is corner stores. Like, seriously, that's all that's there. Or I think they just put a Family Dollar or Dollar General out there, but even still, like, you can't get fresh produce. You can't get fresh, you know, anything out there. All of the stuff is processed. Most of it is chips, candy, and all this other stuff. And then on top of that, you have to also add into the fact that the people who live in those areas either are unemployed or they are making bare minimum, you know, to be able to support themselves. And so when you also go back to this idea of white guilt in you know, people are not wanting to look at their hand in all of this. And it's like, yeah, no, it's not you personally that has a hand in it, but your people as a collective have had a hand in this, right? On a structural level, it's like, how, I don't want to even say ignorant, like ignorant is not even the strongest of the word that I can use, but it's like, how ignorant can you be to even ask that question and be like, how do we get to this point? And it's like, but then it also comes in that conversation of privilege as well, because you don't have to worry about that, right? Because they can get DoorDash, they can get Instacart, they can get, you know, a Whole Foods up the street that they can walk to, or they can get a Kroger, or they can get a HEB, or they can get a Safeway, or they can get whatever your local grocery store is near you. You know, even for me, like where I live in DC, the nearest like grocery store to my house is a smooth 20 minutes walking distance back that way. But even then, compared to down south, that shit is expensive as hell in there. Like, you know, and I get this because I'm in the north, you know, and because I'm in like this tri-state region, or I'm in this what is it, the Metroplex. I learned that new word, you know, last year, that, you know, DC, Baltimore, what is it? DC, Baltimore, Philly, NYC, what's the other, Boston, and somebody else. Is like the Metroplex. It's like the 95 corridor Metroplex, right? Where you have all of these major cities like within, you know, 30 minutes to an hour drive of each other. You know, of course the prices are going to be higher because capitalism, and versus whereas the South, where stuff is still spread out and the cost of living is a lot lower. And that in itself is based off of slavery. That in itself is based off of history. And so even when you're talking about like the approach to it, it's like, yeah, there definitely has to be an approach to it, but it's like, how are you that naive to think that, oh, well, it's just everything is fine and hunky-dory, or it doesn't make sense that it's like this? And it's like, it makes you even wonder, it makes you even step back as a, you know, if you identify as a person of color, or as a Black person, or Latinx, whatever you identify as, you know, it makes you even step back, and it's like, makes you even wonder, it's like, damn, are we really living in two separate worlds, in the same country, in the same city, in the same state, in the same community? It really, it's almost a slap in the face, kind of, you know, to even ask that question or to pose that question, to be like, well, how is it that this is like this? And it's like, I mean, if you have your Bibles, turn with me to the book of St. Matthew. Like, let's look together. Like, how are you not getting this? Like, what's not clicking here? But that's interesting that you bring that up, because now it's like, with epidemiology now, just as the study of it as a whole, it's like it makes you look at just like how broad the conversation of racism is. Because I think a lot of people just get stuck on the, well, he called me a nigger, or they are keeping me from using this public thing, or these people are denying me access to this. And it's like, even what you brought up about as far as redlining, my major is education, so I can clearly see where those redlining and that gerrymandering and all of that stuff, and me being a political science major as well, I can see easily how those things play into context. But when you throw the layer of health on it, it's like, oh, this shit is a lot deeper than what we see. It's like, oh, there's a large iceberg underneath that. Wow. Okay. So where do we even begin? It's like, so now my question is like, because you kind of hit on it as far as like, where do we begin? But it's like, as somebody who's not privy to this stuff, it's like, where do you even begin to do the research to even get to realizing that, oh, this shit is a lot deeper than what it seems? You're still on mute.
Of course, this has been all of the pandemic, me being on mute, saying things important.
Ooh, that's a word right there. Woo! Take a 30-second shout right there if you need one. I'm sorry, y'all. Keep going.
But I think that's a good question though, because I didn't come into this like realization overnight. I didn't come into this because I am, well, part of it is because I am a Black woman, Black queer woman. But I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen. And so I find a lot of people asking me, well, what are the anti-racist things that I can do? One, you could just in your own self try to be an anti-racist person by watching these podcasts, by watching stuff like your channel, by reading books, by listening to people, watching TED Talks, all this stuff. And so getting all of that education surrounding like, what is racism? What does it look like? Where is it embedded? Because it's embedded everywhere. Once you understand that, I think that will help you a whole lot. But I also think that one of the biggest things that I don't see a lot of people talking about is the fact that our system isn't broken. It was designed this way intentionally. And if you can really wrap your mind around that, I think you'll have you'll be able to open up your mind to a lot of things. Because then you're like, wow, this is really devious. this is devious and diabolical for someone to set up a system to be this way, to make sure that the people that don't look like me are put down, not only in this current time that I made this, but for generations and generations and generations to come. And once you realize that and you sit with that, I think then you're ready to digest all of this. What is racism? How does it play? Because I think a lot of times, even within public health, when we're talking about public health has several different, avenues. We talk about public health as like not only people that are at the health departments, but also the people who are responding to fires, also the people who are wanting data, also doctors and nurses. Our legislators are public health too, because they put in policy. And I think policy is a really big part of it. Because I don't think people really understand like policies can influence how you do intervention and prevention. It can influence how it's implemented. It can influence how it's created. And so when we look at that, I think we have to really back up and see the big picture. That's something that I'm super good at, because I like to just kind of lean back and be like, so and so is doing that, and so and so is doing that, and that's great. But not everybody does that. Some people are just like, I want to do my job that I'm like within my expertise, and that's it. But in the reality of it all, you have to be a Jill or a jack of all trades to really tackle all of this. So I would say education, and then coming to terms with the fact that this is something that's diabolical and that it was set in place with the intention of oppressing people, specifically people of color and poor people for generations to come. And so there are resources out there. I know that a lot of people will come to me after like I do presentations and stuff. They'll be like, "Where should I start?" And I'm like, "You should start with Google." And that's not me being an asshole. That's just me being real. There's so much information out there. Get it, read it, absorb it, and process it. And when you're in like presentations and webinars, do active listening. I talked to somebody today about active listening. Um, are you just hearing what people are saying? Or are you processing what they're saying and coming back with questions because you really don't understand? Type thing. So I think those are the key things to start with.
And it's interesting because you brought up two different things, and I definitely want to go back to one thing. But as far as what you were saying, as far as like people don't realize that policy and lawmaking literally is one of the biggest determinants of, you know, public health and racism in public health, right? And I feel like people are wondering, like, well, what do you mean, like, policy with that? It's like the very first thing that popped in my head is like, no matter where you're watching this from, if you are in anybody's major city, wherever you're watching this from, think about where your expressways run, right? Do your expressways run through the white neighborhoods, through the rich side of the town, or do they run through the poor areas, right? Where do your interstates run, right? Because when I think about Memphis, you know, we have the 240 loop that goes all the way around the city, but most of the 240 loop runs in the poor areas of Memphis. Now, granted, Memphis as a whole is, you know, low socioeconomic as a whole. Memphis is 70% Black. Our economy as a whole, even though Memphis is the distribution center of the country, you know, our economy, because of our city legislature, is garbage. Like, to put it nicely, per se, right? Even when I lived in Nashville, the same thing could be said about living in Nashville. You know, some of the expressways, they, you know, go through, you know, some of the more affluent areas, but I-40 literally goes straight through North Nashville. I-24 literally goes straight through Antioch. You know, they go straight through these areas. But then you're probably wondering, like, well, what does that have to do with anything? Okay, your cars give off exhaust, right? That is literally polluting the air around you. If you live in that area and you have an expressway running over your house or running next to your house, you're literally breathing in all of that. You're not breathing in fresh air. And then they're cutting trees down around you so they can build that expressway, right? So it's like when people don't think about how policy impacts that, like, wholeheartedly. And it even boils down all the way down to us being in this panorama, right? Because now when you look at how they're issuing out vaccines and stuff like that, saying, oh, this group needs to get it first, or this group needs to get it first. And, you know, even though a lot of people are like, yeah, I want to get it so I can make sure I'm protected and stuff like that, a lot of people don't realize that when you get your vaccines, they still have to test it on somebody to make sure the bad boy works. You ain't got to go back that far in history to find out where that got fucked up. Let's go back to the Tuskegee experiment. That was in the 40s, y'all. Like, you have to realize that all of these things play into that. But then the other thing that I wanted to kind of talk about is like how you brought up where, you know, a lot of people, when they ask you, what can I do to be more informed and stuff like that? And I can imagine it's mostly white people who are in the middle class or who are in the upper middle class. We're just gonna call a spade, right? But my thing is, it's wild that they are not as aware of this, because I don't think that public health is just a racist issue. It's also a classist issue, because classism was the very first form of racism, right? Like, if you go study your history, go all the way back to, you know, 1619, 1620, all of the late 1600s up to the 1700s, right before, American Revolutionary War. In order for you to have a say-so in government, you had to have some ducats. You had to own land. You had to have something to be part of the ruling class, right? But then once slavery ended and indentured servitude started up, you had a lot of white people saying, well, why is the black people on the same, type time as I am? How do they get the same rights? How do they be able to have money and stuff like I do and have access to things? And then some people got over there and they were like, well, at least I'm not black. But you don't recognize how this stuff can still impact you at the same time, right? And so it's wild to even hear when people have to ask that question of like, how do I become more informed and stuff like that? Like Google still ain't free. Like YouTube still ain't free. When you probably need to be using it before it don't be free anymore, because that may be coming soon. I ain't speaking into existence, but you better watch your government, because they putting shit in your face. Y'all just ain't looking. But it's crazy that people can even, I don't even want to say crazy because that's an ableist term, but it's asinine to me that people can even work their way to even ask that question, as far as like, well, how can I be more informed? And like you said, yeah, you have to start with self and realize your privilege in this, right? If you can, again, walk to your grocery store, if you can get to a farmer's market, if you can get access to these things, and I'm even talking about myself, because there's a lot of people that live in the neighborhood live in my neighborhood, right? Who their only, source of fresh vegetables is that store that I was just talking about. There's a 7-Eleven like literally across the street from me. There's a Walgreens across the street from me. But what fresh produce are you getting out of there? Most of the stuff is going to be canned. There's nothing wrong with canned vegetables, because look, I grew up in the hood. You get a canned vegetable, hell, that is what you got. You do what you got to do. It is what it is. But I've even found myself being privileged to be able to go to the farmer's market and be able to pick my greens and be like, oh, I don't like these because they are wilted or they are turning yellow, or I can go get some peppers and go get what I need and make an actual meal and feel good afterwards. But I don't think a lot of people make that connection between race and class, right? And they don't put the numbers together and be like, oh, so that's how that works. And it's like, yeah, girl, we've been trying to tell y'all this for like 200 years. Like literally have been trying to tell you this for like 2 centuries. Like, where you been? And so now my question to you now is like, even beyond like, how do people even get what is the word, get educated about this? It's like on the policy side of things, right? How can the people, make a change as far as the policies are concerned, or are the policies just like dead set and it's like we can't do shit about it? Like, how does that process look like? Because I think a lot of people, especially because we're looking at this, we're coming off the heels of the presidential election. We are a week away, again, previously recorded, a week away from the inauguration, and a lot of people have justifiably so lost faith in government. So how is it that people can, make that change or start getting to the point where we really start making these serious changes? Because again, it's not even just a race issue at this point, it's a class issue. And if you really pay attention to the way things are playing out, it's about to be either you got it or you don't got it. Ain't no middle class no more. Middle class don't exist no more. It's a, you got the bank or you scraping by waiting on the stimulus package. Like, so how can people make these moves so that way we can actually start making trends to get to where this is not even a thing anymore?
I'm off mute. Okay. So so I think that's a great question. And I will be honest and transparent and say that coming to this conclusion of policy being very important is something that I've done in the past year. And so for me, those routes may look different, but it also depends on your state, I guess, because I don't know all the laws of every single state, but I know like in Arizona, you could do commenting on any policy. that's being put forth in legislation at this point. Like I literally have tabs up right now, all these different policies that I'm reading through to be informed about them. Because I'm also a part of Arizona Public Health Association. I'm on the board of directors, and so what they do is they take a stance on certain things, and that's how we put our independent public health voice out there. And so through that, that's how I take stances on policies to let people know, like, this is not okay, or this is great, we need to support this, or this is not in this realm, so what are we supposed to be doing? But ultimately, what I learned when I visited the Capitol here was that anybody can comment on policies, and that's great. But also, like, your state and federal level is important, but your local level, what your mayor is doing and different things of that nature is really important too. So being very vocal in those meetings, which should be open to the public, if I'm not mistaken. There are a lot of meetings that go on that are open to the public that really I'm opening my eyes to, because when I was in grad school like a year and a half ago, and before that I was just like epi. I'm gonna do epi. I'm going to do biostatistics and epi to make sure that I basically highlight these lived experiences and let white people or people who are in very privileged places know that these issues are real. That's how I'm going to do that. But when I transitioned into this job, I remember having to be like a subject matter expert for something in regards to suicide. And I remember one of the students running an idea by me, and I was like, actually, there's a policy in place that prevents you from doing that. He was like, well, what? And I was like, yeah, I just found out about that this week. And so when you find out about these things, I went to the Capitol for some other stuff and did a tour and everything. And they were like, oh, yeah, we have his website. You can go on and comment. You can, ask to speak, so on and so forth. So, so in various different lights, I also go to this grassroots organization called Mass Live, and they actually go into these different meetings, whether it's mayoral, what have you. They go into these meetings and they make their statements, and they're not afraid to make their statements. So there's like the support group of like, no, this is not okay. We're not going to stand for it. And many times in those spaces, um, you know, unfortunately, white people do silence people. People in power silence people. That happens. But I also encourage people to be in their faces. You do not have to have, like, a PhD in X, Y, and Z to make these statements and your opinion be valid. I think everyone, and I heard this from the author of Eloquent Rage, I think it was, and she said everybody has a PhD in their own experience, and that's valid. So realizing that, I think within public health, we have to realize that everyone has a PhD within their own experience. So their seat at the table, whether they're a community member that works at McDonald's, no shade to McDonald's, or whether they're a community member that works at a grassroots organization, a community member that is a motivational speaker, what have you, all of those voices are valid and they have equal value. Just because you're at the head of the front of the table doesn't mean anything. And so I implore people and really encourage people to make sure that they take pride in that PhD in their own experience, and they bring that to the table in any sense. And there will be cases where you're silenced, but there will also be cases where you're heard. And that is what's most important. So get into those spaces, mayor, what have you, legislative, congressional, whatever you find, get into those spaces, say what you need to say, and keep on saying what you need to say.
I like that, because I definitely think a lot of people have been feeling very intimidated by speaking out on things. And I know a lot of people are going to probably look at me sideways, but even with the silencing and the censoring of the president, a lot of people are seeing this. I've seen a easily split viewpoint of people like, yay, he's being censored, and other people are like, that's gonna pose a problem later on down the line. And granted, I get why, all of these different social media apps and whatever, did censor, because of some of the things that have been said, which side note, I'm like, why y'all wait this long? He been doing this shit. He literally has been talking out of his neck and out of his ass since 2014, 13, 12. And you waited to 2021, 10 days before he getting out of office to do this shit. Like, why are you waiting now? That if that don't send off an alarm in your head, whatever. But then the other side of people, like, if they have the power to censor him, then that means they have the power to censor other people and their thought process and ideas. And even just how you said, there's a lot of white people or people who are in power that are silencing people because it's like you don't want to hear their views. And what a lot of people don't recognize and realize is that even though what Donald Trump was doing, like a lot of stuff that he was saying, is actually, I mean, he violated the First Amendment so many different ways. And again, it's like, why are we just not doing anything about this? But it's like a lot of people don't recognize, it's like that's the same shit that Russia and Germany, Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan and Rome and current communist China and North Korea, like that's the same type of time that they're on, to where you can't voice your opinions and you can't, share your views, especially when shit is actually harming you, right? And I feel like a lot of people are intimidated just by that off, the strength of, they feel like somebody's gonna come in and literally just snatch their computer and be like, hey, you can't say this, or snatch their phone, which in some cases is actually very real for a lot of people. Like it is not far-fetched that that's a thing. But at the same time, like you said, everybody has a PhD in experience, which that's a word in itself. Because wow, I didn't even think about it like that. I feel like, and I think I've discussed this on a previous episode before, where like a lot of people, because we live in a capitalistic society, capitalism will tell you that your viewpoints and that your experience is not valid, or that, you're not worth anything if you're not making somebody else money, or you're not putting into somebody else's dream, right? But in order for us to break out of that paradigm and break out of that mindset, we have to recognize that what we bring to the table is just as valid, that our viewpoints and that our experiences are just as valid. So that way we can get to the point where we're speaking up and like, so let me show you where you got me fucked up. If you make a right at the light and then go down the street, that's where you had me fucked up, right? But I feel like a lot of people think that because, and it's not even just thought process and ideology, it's something else that I'm actually learning, is that it's a lot of the legalese and a lot of the language that is used in these policies. It trips people up. But again, there's also this other side of, there is a bit of laziness in it as well. We're just gonna have to call it what it is, where people don't want to do the research. Like you said, you have several tabs up open and you're looking at all of these things and how they play into, public health issues. Same thing with me when I'm in my doctoral program. I have a 4,000 and a half, tabs up of looking at how racism plays in education, how, psychology plays in the education, how, these different social movements and things like that, how history, how all these different things play into education. And that is what makes me informed and gives me my vitriol and my fire to be like, oh, you really got us fucked up. Let's address some things, right? But I really think it is important that people kind of get past that, and and because you don't need a teacher to teach you anything. You just need a willingness to go do the work. And I think a lot of people are afraid to do the work, or they're like, I don't have time to do the work. But it's like, you have to learn how to make time. It's just like, if you don't make time for your health now, you will be sick later. If you don't prioritize your health, don't be surprised when you are diagnosed with diabetes, or you're diagnosed with high blood pressure, or you're diagnosed with a mental health disorder or whatever. Like you have to put in that time, and you have to prioritize. You have to make things a priority, so that way you can, speak up and share your voice. Because if 2020 alone didn't show y'all that this government is gonna keep playing in your face until y'all say something, and I mean seriously, gonna keep playing in your face until you say, because come on, y'all, we got $1,200 in April, and it's almost April again. some folks didn't even get that. Some people are just now getting the 600. Practically you got less than $2,000, which most people don't even make that on a bi-weekly check. And they told you to survive off of that. Like, come on, y'all. Like, at some point in time, you have to speak up, because what was that somebody that said? Two different quotes that came to my mind. One, that you teach people how to treat you, right? And not only that, when you don't speak up, you allow people to do whatever the fuck they want to do. Yeah, I'm paraphrasing that second quote, but like, when you don't speak up, like, you are essentially buying into your own, slavery. You're buying into your own oppression. And as much as people said that, Kanye West was off his damn rocker when he said this, slavery is a choice. Again, as I said in the previous episode, his word choice threw that entire message off. But it's like, at some point in time, if you don't stand up for yourself and you don't speak up for yourself, when they do come out and say, hey, so here's this thing that you have to take, and you're not like, and you don't like, so no, then you've essentially, like, people who were Holocaust survivors, they were like, if I had known that I was saying yes to all these things, that it was going to lead me into the concentration camp, I would have fought back way before then. And it's like, yeah, but if you are intimidated by the man, or if you're intimidated by the power structure, or you're intimidated by the wording, or you're intimidated by the language, like, yes, it is a lot to get into, and the hole is deep, and you only see the tip of the iceberg, and it is like 5 football fields long and large of an iceberg, of the rest of it underneath the water. Yes, like, it's hard. You do have to get through some things. You have to handle and tackle some hard truths. But if you don't handle and tackle those hard truths, you may never get your freedom. You literally may never get out of this, space of where racism is a mental health, a physical health, a public health crisis. Like, it literally is at this point. Because for Black folks at this point, we literally, at some point in time, and I just know it's coming soon, we got to get to a point where we're like, all right, now okay, all guns aside, jokes aside, put everything down. Some got to change, like, now. And you can't keep waiting on Jesus. We can't keep waiting on Superman. We can't keep waiting on the vote. We can't keep waiting on Kamala. We can't keep waiting on Barack. We can't keep waiting on Michelle. We can't keep waiting on Beyonce. We can't keep waiting on Oprah. We can't keep waiting on anybody to come and make this shit shake for us. You have to be willing to make this shit shake for yourself. And even as somebody who's like, that ain't got half the times, I'm like, that ain't got shit to do with me. It may not have nothing to do with you yet, but that bug will come knocking on your doorstep very, very soon. It will. It may not, as my pastor say, I may not have got to your address yet, but I'm coming. Just wait on it. I'm getting there.
Yeah, and I think, like, a couple of things to your points, which are great. I think, well, one, Zeruiah Hurston, if you're silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. That one, of course.
I think
There's
that's what I was trying to say. Yeah, I knew I paraphrased the hell out of that. I was like, I can't think of the exact quote, but that's exactly where I was going. Like, thank you for putting that. Y'all, I study a lot. I don't be remembering shit. I try.
It's hard, I know. And then, like, in that recent video that came out with all those Black actresses and advocates, I know Kerry Washington said, respect is a minimum, and that resonated with me because, it doesn't matter, like, where you are in this chain. If you're a person of color, you're still a person of color. They want you to fit a mold, and if you don't fit into that mold, they will get rid of you in a second. No issues, no problems, no words said. Uh, so that's one thing. And then I also want to kind of put the caveat of, like, recognizing my own privilege, because during this pandemic, a lot of people do not have access to internet. A lot of people do not have that time to do what they need to do. They work in 2 and 3 jobs, or they're trying to put food on the table any way that they can because they might have lost their jobs. And so they're getting rid of a lot of things that we think are basic needs, like internet and lights and different things of that nature. So I do want to put that caveat out. Like, I am privileged. I know that. I know that I'm also privileged with my education. So somebody might give me the benefit of the doubt that they wouldn't give someone else. But I still do think that there are ways in which we can work around those things. And then there's also grassroots organizations like MassLib, who are really good at educating people, really good at putting on different programs and educational presentations outside of like work hours and different things of that nature. But I do realize that there are several people who don't get to go to those things. And then there's something else you said. I forget what you said. Oh, waiting on like Barack Obama, Michelle, and all that stuff. And I definitely want to touch on that because I think one of the critiques of like the Black Lives Matter movement was that there wasn't like an ipso facto like leader. And so I think we're looking for this like altogether leader that we can follow, but it's not going to be that way. I don't think it will be that way just because of the way that we're set up as a society and the fact that Black people are not a monolith. And the fact that I think we are such intelligent people. Like when I talk to Black and brown young people, it like freaks me out a little bit because I'm like, y'all know what you want. Like I like back in February last year, I talked to some Black and brown kids, and I was talking to them about suicide, and then the increase in suicide among our Black youth in particular, and what that was looking like. And so like that was really at the beginning stages of those things being published and those findings from various different national databases and whatnot. But when I asked them, I was like, yeah, we're doing a lot of reporting, but we're not asking kids like why is this happening? They might know. Like they know more than we think. And so when I asked them about that, they were like, people are not listening to us and they're casting us aside. Like that's why we're struggling mentally and emotionally. And so just from that example of like them being able to just identify within seconds of me asking the question helps me know that there are so many smart people within this group, and there are so many leaders within the Black and brown communities and POC communities that it wouldn't make sense for one of us to just lead something for us to be like, this is enough. And I always tell people anytime I'm like, you need to promote health equity from your position and different things of that nature. Like, do everything within your power. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be commenting on policy. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be heading like a Medicaid organization. That doesn't necessarily mean that. You might be doing that, doing the health equity work that you need to be doing by doing a community garden. And you could do that without the internet. You could do that with your community, and that's it. You might be doing it through mentoring kids in your own community. You might be doing it through making sure all the kids in your community get home safe every night. Whatever it is, like you're still doing something. And so I always say like, yeah, we need to focus on policy, we need to do this, we need to do that. But I also think that we as people who are privileged need to be reinvesting into our communities and elevating the resources they already have. Like you had an interview with somebody about being a doula. Like doulas are like the number one thing that Black women need to like have an advocate. I know one of the groups here. I'm gonna mess up their name. Healthy Phoenix Star. I'm gonna mess it up, but I'll give it to Charles to put up. But they do work with doulas and they send them into prisons for women to advocate for them and to make sure that they're not being pushed into having labor before like they actually are in labor, or they're advocating for them to have more time with their kids before they're taken away and different things of that nature. So like things like that, where why don't we invest or create a policy that redirects money and monies, as they say, and appropriations, as I'm reading these things, redirects this monies to creating a center for doulas and midwives and different things within a Black community. Why is that not happening? Things like that. And so I think not everyone has to focus on policy and not everyone has to comment on policy. But if you can, you should. But there are so many different ways to combat structural racism, to combat classism, heterosexism, and different things of that nature. And there are ways in which you can do it within your reach. And I think that's the biggest thing. We have to figure out how we can do it within our own reach and make sure that everybody's trying to do it within their own reach. Because that's how change happens. We're not going to have one person that's going to create this change because that's just not realistic. We have to be like a big group of people making this happen. So those are my 2 cents.
No, you are 100% correct about it. Even as far as going back with the kids, me being a teacher, like, and teaching social studies, of course, we have to have conversations. And of course, like through my learning, how to become a teacher and stuff like that, we've always been taught, shy away from political issues, shy away from social issues and topics and stuff like that. And it's like, uh, yeah, you telling the wrong person to do that, because like you said, these kids are very intelligent. It makes me think of my 8th graders from a couple years ago. They are in 10th grade now, 11th grade now. And when I tell you, those were the most vocal group of kids that I have ever ran into, and they are so intelligent, because I will never forget the day that they made me scrap my entire lesson. Like, we were talking about the Trail of Tears. We were talking about Andrew Jackson and how he sent troops into Georgia and told all the natives to pack their shit and get the fuck on out and march 5,000 miles on the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma. And they were able to take that and connect it to the ice raids that were going on at the same time. And I was like, y'all, how did y'all even, I'm still dumbfounded to this day how they managed to make that connection. But literally, we had, like, my classes were 55 minutes long. We weren't even 10 minutes in the class. And I told them, I said, put that up. We'll talk about that later. Continue this conversation. And they were able to take that conversation, and I was so proud at the end of, because it's like, they're ready. Like, and we can't keep saying that the kids don't know what they're talking about and that they don't have the knowledge and that they don't have the information, because 9 times out of 10, shoot, 10 times out of 10, sometimes 11 times out of 10, they know a lot more than the grown folk that are around them. And that group of kids proved that to me, like, hands down that day. So even when you brought up as far as talking to them about mental health issues and suicide and stuff like that, it's like, they know and they're aware because they see this, they live this on a daily basis. But we have to stop saying that they're too young to have these conversations, because just like you said, they are saying that people are not listening to them. And that is what made me become an advocate for my students when I did move back to Memphis, because they were saying the same thing. Like, nobody's listening to what we actually need. And when you are the person that listens to what they actually need, you begin to realize that how much of a restriction is placed on them, and how much you've done it to them, and how much it was done to you. Like, like I said earlier, you start to realize how fucked up all this stuff is, because it makes you have to answer some hard truths. But even to your other point, though, as far as the grassroots organization, like, everybody, like you said, doesn't have to be a teacher. Everybody doesn't have to be an epidemiologist. Everybody doesn't have to be in policy. Everybody doesn't have to speak up. And like you said, everybody's a leader in their own right. Gandhi's racist ass told you that if you want to see change, you have to be the change that you want to see. Like, it has to start here. It has to start within, which is to address those hard truths, which is to address those, do the reading and stuff like that. And even with the caveat of, people don't have access to internet, people don't have access to things that they would need in order to get to that point. Like you said, people can start community gardens, because everybody still got to eat. You still have to eat food. Your food don't just pop up in Kroger. Like, it had to be grown. Like, it had to, and even though a lot of people was like, well, I don't know how to do that. I mean, it ain't shit. Watch the plants. They'll tell you how to do it. Like the flowers that grow around you every year, them same flowers, no matter where you go in this country. I don't even know what they're called, but the little white and yellow ones that be popping up in people's yards, like, they grow every single year. All you got to do is watch just sit there for a minute and just watch what they do. At one point in time, you see all that pollen flying around in the air. You see all the seeds dropping down and they end up in the ground. Just give it some time and you can make something shape. But it also made me think back to that woman. Where was she? In Philly, I think, or was she in New York? I want to say she was in Philly. where her neighbors were harassing her and stuff like that, and the men were sitting outside her house watching guard to make sure folks didn't do nothing to her because the police officers weren't gonna do it. Like, this is what she's referring to. Like, we have to get back to that community mindset, when kind of what I was bringing up earlier and what I referred to on the last episode about collective economics. Like, we have to get back to a point where we are giving back to each other without, expectation and without reservation. Because a lot of people think that, oh, because I don't get something back, that I shouldn't be able to give. Like, don't get me wrong, reciprocity by all means. If you champion reciprocity, by all means do that. But when it's feeding into everybody else, the way that we are shifting now, because again, if you haven't paid attention to 2020, I mean, between Trump and this pandemic, we've exposed how trash the healthcare system is. We've exposed how trash the economic system is. We've exposed how trash the education system is. We've exposed how trash policy is, how lawmaking is. We've exposed all of these different things. And now it's at this point where we have to go back to what we were used to, which is that tribal setting. What's the easiest group of people that you can go back and refer to get the information from? The Black Panther Party. The whole reason why your baby get free breakfast at school is because of the Black Panther Party, and Richard Nixon decided he was going to take that and implement it like he gave a damn about the kids. No, like that started based off a grassroots organization that then blew up into a national thing. And so, like you said, everybody is a leader in their own right, but you have to figure out where your place is in this. I got to get this woman on here because you also made me think about there's a grassroots organization called Kaya Night Kitchen here. And this woman gets fresh produce and clothes and things, and she puts together baskets and sets up tables on various streets here in DC to make sure that the homeless have what they need, even though, again, United States government don't give a half of a shit about them. The PG County, Prince George's County in Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland, Arlington, Fairfax, Virginia, like it's clear that they don't care, but those people still can get a hot meal, a hot, healthy meal. They can still get produce, they can get their necessities. Like, I've put together some of these baskets and put together some of these things with her, and it's like, she's out here asking for help, like asking for monetary donations, asking for people to come and volunteer their time. And it's like, you don't have to, all it is 2 hours out of your day on a Saturday. What are you really doing in a panorama? Ain't like you can go nowhere. So go and help somebody out to help someone else, because that's literally what's going to help people out. Because at any point in time, it could be you, and you could be relying on those same resources. But like we both have said, you can't wait on Superman to come save you. You got to get up and do the work yourself. Faith without work is going to always be dead. And so if you can believe on it, you can put the work behind it too. So, any last comments, questions, concerns for the class today before we get up out of here, madam?
Oh man, I don't know. This is a good conversation too. I appreciate being on here. I think one of the biggest things is listening. That's what we really need to do. We need to be listening to our kids. We need to be listening from our ivory towers, because some people are real comfortable there. And we need to be actively listening. So, everything that was shared today, we realize that there might be privilege in some of the things that we said. But at the end of the day, you find, I think the history of Black people is making a way out of no way. I think that might be a motto that we have somewhere in our like.
I mean, they say it in the church. They say Jesus can make a way out of nowhere. I mean, Black folk have literally been doing it since the beginning of the inception of this country. We've been doing it. Like, Laura Bancroft, niggas been doing it. Like, come on.
Exactly. So, just listen and take the action that you think is appropriate. And then I think one other thing, especially in these current times, is that if you feel that you're going to be on the good side of history, continue on. If you don't feel like you're going to be on the good side of history, when you look back at it, don't do it. That's all.
And it's literally just that simple. I mean, literally that simple. I mean, there's nothing else even to say behind it. Thank you so much, Zeruiah, for coming through and gracing this platform with your presence, your knowledge, your wisdom, and your understanding, and learning the people something about public health and racism and what the hell epidemiology is. I'm gonna put the word down there so y'all can see what it's how it's spelled, and I might have to put the pronunciation, all that good stuff, because I promise you it's not a cuss word. It's not. You can say it like. And what was the other one you said? Biostatistics. Yeah, that's a. I'm gonna put that there. Yeah, those are real words. These are real sayings. Like these are things. These are actual names of things. So but I appreciate you so much for coming through and learning people something, because y'all, I'm sorry, I've noticed just over the last few episodes, this podcast, this platform is definitely going to be life-changing for somebody. I don't know who, but it's a lot of people and it's a lot of information and it's a lot of gems on here that's been dropped. And if don't know where to begin, just click the episode. You'll learn something new. I promise you will. But you have to be willing to do the work. I'm sorry, nobody's gonna do it for you. Some people will hold your hand. I'm an educator. I hold your hand through it up to a certain point, but at some point, I'm gonna make you go out there and do homework. You got homework to do it on y'all. But again, thank you so much for coming on here and gracing the presidents and gracing the people and learning them something new. Hopefully y'all learned something today. Hopefully you took some notes. You better have.
And I want to say how proud I am of you. We've known each other for quite some time, and I'm just so proud of the man that you're growing into and what you're doing in this platform. So continue doing everything you need to do, because this is also one of your ways too to make change. So yeah, and if anybody needs me, holla at me, email me.
And I will definitely put if y'all need to get in contact with her. Trust me, I will let her know, because she exclusive. She busy. She out here trying to save the world. She can't be just tending to everybody. She can't just talk to everybody. Yes, I will be a gatekeeper. I damn sure will. Fuck it, I don't care. But with that being the case, most importantly, that being said, and most importantly understood, y'all be great. Y'all enjoy. Hopefully, where you are in the neck of the woods, it ain't ungodly cold. It don't feel like the tundra outside. Hopefully, it warms up soon. And hopefully, the world ain't ended by the time this episode comes out. Cause, woo, child. Just say a prayer over yourself, over your neighbor, over your family. If you don't pray, meditate. If you don't do that, just think positive thoughts. That's all I can say. But until next time, y'all be great. I holla. Ooh, yeah. Baby girl.